Okay, so one of the questions that inevitably comes up time and time again in the submissions process is, if you get accepted, how many submissions did it take? I'm going to give you guys a breakdown of exactly how many submissions I made and how I tracked all of it. But first, a quick preamble about what you typically need to make that first submission. Now, admittedly, YouTube is probably not the best place to come for stats on things like this. My recommendation would actually be to go to the R writing subreddit. Most often, this will be in the form of querying agents. So the stats will be number of submissions made, number of rejections received, number of requests for full or partial manuscripts, and finally, if they got any offers for representation. Redditors tend to go into a level of detail that I think is kind of moot on this, but I do see a lot of value in a video that just goes over the general process and what you can expect. So let's say you have a completed manuscript. Your novel is done, it's polished, you're happy with it. Submission guidelines will vary depending on the agent or, in some cases, publisher that you're submitting to, but there is a general rule of thumb for what they typically ask for. Most of the time, it's going to be a query letter, the first 3 chapters of the manuscript, and a 1 or 2 page synopsis. There are plenty of resources online about how to write a query letter and what typically makes for a good one, so I won't go into that level of detail here. I might make a video in future about how I wrote and structured mine, so if that's the kind of content you're looking for, do leave me a comment down below. Most of the time, you're going to be emailing these 3 things to the agent in question. Sometimes, if you're subbing to a really big agency, they typically have a web form instead, which is more often than not a bit of a headache, to be honest. Anyone who's familiar with the platform called Submittable, that was actually the platform on which my work was accepted. So even though Submittable tends to be for shorter fiction, there are certainly avenues in which manuscripts are accepted there as well. Next up, what you absolutely must do, what is an essential and indispensable part of this process, is to research and know who it is you're submitting to. Not every agent is going to represent everything, and a lot of them have very particular interests. Most agents or agencies that you're submitting to, particularly if they're on the larger side, will have sections on the website about the acquisitions team and which of them are open to unsolicited submissions. It's in this section that you typically find a little bit more about that person's individual history, but more importantly for our purposes here, you get a lot more information about what they like to read and what they're also looking to publish next. The reason this is an important part of your process is you'll be able to discern very quickly whether you're wasting your time submitting to them or not. If I'm seeking to publish my literary fiction, for example, I'm not going to query an agent who specifies that they're mostly interested in sci-fi and non-fiction about baseball. This person is not going to be interested in my work, and even in the event that they do pass it on to someone at the same agency who might be interested, they won't be so inclined to do this because you clearly haven't done your research. It just doesn't reflect well on your submission that you haven't really read up about them at all, and no agent is going to want a client who can be bothered to take that care. Submitting to the right agent is only part of the process here, because you're also going to want to reflect this in your query itself. A good example, again without getting too much into query letters, is if an agent says that they're particularly looking for literary fiction and that's what I'm submitting, I might open my query by saying, I notice that you're actively seeking literary fiction. And if there's something in their bio that's really pertinent to what you're submitting, like let's say that you've written historical fiction in the Tudor era, for example, and the agent says in their bio that their favorite books are Hilary Mantel's Thomas Cromwell series, I don't think it would be a stretch to open your query with, I was compelled to reach out when I read that your favorite books align with my work, etc. I think it goes without saying that no matter how many submissions you make before you get your novel accepted, you would be absolutely foolish not to track not only who you're submitting to, but when. The reason, if anyone can remember from my first video, is because I mentioned that you very often won't get a rejection at all. This tends to be the case more often with big names than not. The reason being that really big, popular agencies just get inundated with submissions and they just don't have the capacity to reply to them all. This is what my personal submission tracker looks like in Excel, and I can tell you that I made 46 submissions overall. That's generally a little higher than some of the submission counts that I've seen. Typically speaking, I think if you're writing in a genre where there's a lot of market demand at the time of submission and your writing and your plot and everything are at a very high level, you might well expect to make no more than 5 or 10 submissions before you find someone who wants to read the full manuscript. If they've already asked for the first 3 chapters upon submission, that's when they'll email you and say, I loved your opening, please send me the rest. Now, here's something interesting about my case specifically. I knew when I started out that my novel was not going to be an easy sell. It's literary fiction, doesn't neatly fit into any kind of subgenre. Just because it's the best thing that I think I've ever written doesn't mean that I think it's poised to fly off the shelves without any marketing effort on my part. And the reason I'm comfortable saying this is that the market for fiction goes in cycles like everything does. And if it's good, it still has its niche. That said, agents were by and large not interested in my book. I had a number of agents say that they enjoyed the story, connected with the writing, the characters, but had no other choice than to pass on it. And I've been at this long enough that I understand why. There was a meme going around in literary circles a few months back of all the times this author had been told by agents that she'd written this sublime, fascinating, compelling work, but it was to the agent's heartfelt regret that they would be unable to move forward with it. And the question is begged, if you liked it so much, why did you reject it? The reason is because you can think that something's really artistically poignant and impressive and a great read, and still at the same time think that you'd have a hard time selling it. And I don't blame them for that. The publishing industry has gone through some dramatic change in the last 10 or 20 years. And I know for a fact that it's not a stretch to say that not all of that has been in favor of what is traditional. Unfortunately, that means that risks, including creative risks, are at the very least approached with trepidation. So with my book, I explored a growing alternative path, which is to approach small publishers directly. One of the key benefits of doing this is that it cuts out the middleman. You don't need an agent to represent you in pursuing your work for publication. I personally know writing friends who have gone through the heartbreak of securing an agent who loves their story, went through all that time and effort of approaching publishers and pitching it, and simply weren't able to sell it. And it's not a quick heartbreak either. Getting an agent and running every publication option dry with them might take years. It's genuinely not surprising to me to see so many posts on Reddit by authors who have experienced that high of securing an agent, only to months later have to admit to themselves that the end of the road has come. The disadvantage of approaching smaller publishers should be obvious enough. Small presses are exactly that. They don't have the same reach that the big five do. And they certainly don't make the same kind of money. For the most part, if you're getting published through a small press or a small publisher, there almost certainly won't be an advance. You typically get a much more favorable royalty, but it also means that if you expect to make any kind of real financial gain, even a small one, you're going to be doing the vast majority of the work in marketing and selling your novel. That said, in more recent years, those lines have started to blur, by which I mean that even if you get picked up by a big five publisher, which is generally speaking most authors' ideal scenario, because it would come with a perhaps 4 or maybe even 5-figure advance. Digital marketing and social media, particularly social media, are essential. Even a very big publisher knows these days that the best person to sell a book is the person who wrote it. So as the author, the onus still lies very much with you. This funny story is a bit of a side note, but I remember there was this guy I met at one of my writing groups years ago who was very odd. And that doesn't say much considering that, I mean, we're all quite odd. But he had this idea in his head that once he wrote what he felt he needed to write, publishers would approach him. I don't think he worked out in his head the logistics of how they would even know to do that. But that was what he said. That is very much not how this works. So, the Spark Notes. Always track who you're submitting to and when. Research the agency and the agents that you want to pitch to, and I beg you, read the submission guidelines. Very often, if you don't follow their instructions to the letter, they're not going to be interested in working with you. The way to think about it is that if you were an agent or a publisher, you too would want a client who at least was able to follow very simple instructions. And with all that said, good luck on your journey.